In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Apple rolls out software upgrades from the iPhone to the Mac, TV, and watch at the Worldwide Developers Conference and fires a shot across the bow at Facebook. We'll bring you highlights and reaction. Plus, Microsoft returns to its developer roots with its $7.5 billion purchase of GitHub, but not all developers are happy. I speak with Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella ahead. And Facebook is disputing a New York Times report that it opened user data up to at least 60 phone makers, offering deep access to not just users, but their friends. So what are the next moves for the tech giant, and is your data at risk? First, to our top story. Apple holding its annual Worldwide Developers Conference in San Jose, California, where Tim Cook took the stage to welcome developers from around the world.
And I couldn't be happier to announce that we now have over 20 million Apple developers around the world. That's more than ever before.
While no new gadgets were announced, Apple is giving the software that runs iPhones and iPads a much-needed overhaul. Software engineering head Craig Federighi announced iOS 12 with improvements to the operating system's performance and reliability. This coming in addition to enhanced augmented reality apps and new tools to monitor and moderate tech addiction. The focus overall, improving speed, efficiency, and making us even more connected to our devices, and those devices more connected to each other. Joining us now with more, our Bloomberg Tech Senior Executive Editor Brad Stone here in San Francisco, and Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman, who covers all things Apple outside the conference. Both of you were inside watching these announcements. So, Mark, I do want to start with you. You know, of all the things that Apple announced today, what stands out to you the most?
Definitely what stands out the most to me is this iOS app and Mac app merger that we first wrote about all the way back in December. And since we wrote about that, there was a lot of criticism for that story, saying it wasn't true, but I guess that's what happens. So this basically would allow you to run iOS applications on your Mac computers and vice versa. It is a significant sea change for the way apps work. And apps, believe it or not, are more important to Apple than ever before because it is a core part of the company's services business, which the company has outright said is its most important going forward and fastest growing segment, a $50 billion per year business by 2021.
Little I told you so there from Mark Gurman. Craig Federighi also talked about how the focus now is improving performance, this after years of complaints that sometimes the software just doesn't work. Take a listen.
For iOS 12, we are doubling down on performance. We're working top to bottom, making improvements to make your device faster and more responsive.
It's interesting, Brad, there that he's saying we're not going to give you a dramatically different experience. We're just going to make what you have better.
Yeah, and let's be clear, they tout performance improvements every year. I mean, overall, the president makes more news in his early morning tweet than Apple made in its whole announcement today.
Right, no one more thing, no surprises.
Yeah, and look, last year they introduced the HomePod, and then they didn't even launch it in calendar 2017. So, this was an event that was for developers. The news that Mark talked about, apps for both platforms combining, that was really the most monumental announcement we got today. The speed performance is important for Apple because they control the chips, they control the software, they control the hardware.
And now they're making more of their own chips.
Right, and all their users get the new OS updates. Here on my Android, I'm probably using 2 generations ago OS. So they can tout things like that. And they did make a point of saying that even iPhone users with the older model phones will see those performance improvements. Obviously, a reaction to the dust up earlier in the year where they were accused of slowing down phones.
We also got a reaction to accusations that Apple isn't doing enough to prevent tech addiction. Take a listen to what Craig Federighi had to say about that.
We know there are people who would like a little extra help in managing their use of apps. And for them, we've created app limits. So if in your activity report, you see an app where you might want to be spending a little bit less time, well, you can set your own limit.
Mark, the irony was rich here because at the same time they're giving us these tools to monitor how much time we're spending, they're also working on things like Emojis and group FaceTime that'll only make us more addicted to our phones, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Emily. On the surface, it is quite ironic that they would give tools that, over time could inspire people to use their phones less, which in turn would, make less money for Apple. But to be honest here, no one's going to stop buying iPhones or any phones. No one's really going to stop using their phones. It's actually going to become a competitive advantage, I think, because what I think is they have the best implementation we've seen so far of these types of tools, and everyone's going to have them. So we might have a use case for some consumers in a few years from now saying, hey, I want to buy the phone that does the best job of limiting how much I use this phone. No one's going to not buy a phone, but they want the phone that does the best job at limiting that. And that's what Apple's trying to do with this OS update.
Brad?
Yeah, and I think they're very well intentioned, right? But even the parental controls I found to be fascinating, and I'm looking forward to fighting with my kids incessantly about them. But look, tools like these Emojis, group FaceTime, something else they announced today. My kids are going to love that, to do FaceTime with all their classmates at once. This is a little perhaps too much, but it's a little bit like selling candy-flavored cigarettes, but they're putting the warning label on it. These new products today are going to be very compelling to kids, and it will be challenging, but perhaps a little bit easier with these new tools for parents to limit the use.
Now, they also laid out more incremental developments to the developers' tools that they're giving for augmented reality development. And Mark, Tim Cook has said that AR, he believes, could be the next big thing. Is this a bigger deal than it may sound?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And to get a product right, you really have to test it in the field. And Apple, as we've reported on this show many times, is working on an augmented reality headset, a pair of standalone glasses that can overlay images to your real-world environment with cameras and Siri and all sorts of features. But not like with Google. They came out with Google Glass very publicly. It flopped. It wasn't so great. It's very expensive. What Apple's doing here is saying, hey, how can we bring this technology to the masses without giving it away, without doing a prototype? Well, they said we can use the cameras we already have in our over 1 billion iPhones and iPads. So what you're seeing here is year after year they're porting more of the AR features that they're working on for this headset to the phones, making the most out of that technology for the time being before they have the real hardware ready to go in a couple of years' time.
Brad, how does what we saw today set Apple up for the next few years where we're using our devices longer, we're not upgrading as quickly, and also services are even more important to the bottom line? Well,
I mean, I think this is an event for developers. And it's energizing the developer community. It's giving them new tools to write, say, AR applications. USDV was an AR language they trotted out this year. What Mark talked about earlier, unifying Mac OS and iOS apps to make it basically easier for a developer to write, one set of tools for all platforms. I think what this does, it doesn't give us much insight into what's coming later this year or next year. I'll count on Mark Gurman to tell me that, but I think it energizes the developer community.
As will I. Okay, Brad Stone, our senior executive editor for Bloomberg Technology, and Mark Gurman, who covers all things Apple for us. Thank you both. Now to a story we are watching. Dell, the world's largest private tech company, reported an upbeat first quarter, signaling the improving corporate IT spending environment has boosted its fortunes. Revenue climbed 19% to $21.4 billion in the period. CEO Michael Dell has been considering strategic options for the company, including a tie-up with VMware or a possible IPO. Coming up, Microsoft is going back to its roots, buying GitHub, a code repository company popular with many software developers. Our conversation with Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella is next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg. Microsoft announced it's buying the coding site GitHub in a deal valued at $7.5 billion. The deal helps Microsoft, which is increasingly relying on open source software to add programming tools. I spoke with Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella earlier and asked what GitHub adds to Microsoft now and in the long run.
You know, if you think about what's happening in the world around us, computing is being embedded in every place and everything, and it's impacting our daily lives and our economy, from precision agriculture to precision medicine, or personalized education to personalized banking is being driven by software, and every company is becoming digital, and that world is being built by developers. In fact, there's a LinkedIn stat which shows that development in non-tech companies, or developers in non-tech companies like retail or energy, is growing by double digits, and 25% higher growth rate there than even in the tech companies. So that just shows that we're in the very early innings of what is going to be a set of tools and SaaS services that are required to empower every developer out there. So that's the real strategic rationale. If you think about Microsoft, we've always been a developer-first company. That's how we got started with the developer tools for the Altair. And now we're all in on open source. And so with that, really, the coming together of GitHub and Microsoft makes a lot of sense for us. We can contribute a lot and stay true to the original ethos of GitHub. And that's really how we will operate even GitHub going forward, which is being developer first.
GitHub has had issues finding a way to grow revenue significantly, turn a profit. They raised at $2 billion just a few years ago. What is Microsoft going to do differently to justify this $7.5 billion price tag?
You know, we feel very, very good about the growth rates that GitHub has. But GitHub first starts, whether you're a hobbyist or a student or a small startup or a person working in a large company wants a private repo, to be able to use GitHub as a free service. And then they have done a good job of having a freemium model going from that free service to paid versions of it for organizational use. We think we can scale that by first, though, staying true to building that service up and making sure that it's an open platform for all tools, all clouds, all client platform targets as well. So we think that we can bring a lot in terms of scale and reach to additional customers and additional channels, but we feel very, very bullish about what we can do for developers just on organically growing GitHub.
There's been some consternation in the developer community about this acquisition, and I'm sure you've seen some of this. You know, some critics out there saying this is a sad end to GitHub's independence, that the list of reasons why is endless. How do you reassure them and bring them along?
No, it's a very critical element to this, in the sense we are very committed to keeping that developer-first ethos of GitHub going forward. And that's why we have really, between Chris, who is the CEO of GitHub, and me, we decided to run this company independently, even post-close, operate it as an open platform. And Nat Friedman, who came to us from Xamarin, he was the CEO of Xamarin a couple of years ago, has a lot of open source credentials. He's going to be the CEO post-close. He'll be the new maintainer, if you will, of GitHub. And he'll stay true to what the GitHub community really demands of anybody who's maintaining that community. And so we'll have to earn the trust. There's no question of that. Our actions from the recent past should help assure every open source developer of what Microsoft's intent are. And of course, they should measure us by what we do going forward and hold us accountable.
Speaking of trust, there are new revelations today about data Facebook shared with its device partners. You know, these ensuing controversies could have an impact on Microsoft. How concerned are you about increasing tech regulation?
I mean, overall, I think each company is different here in terms of what their core products are and core business models are. In our case, our entire business model is all about being custodians of data and providing services to both consumers and organizational customers. And trust is everything. In other words, we have to secure the data and use the data to benefit our customers, because that's really our business model. Without it, there is no Microsoft or no Microsoft product. So to me, making sure that we live up to the high standards and expectations of our customers, as well as the regulations that are already in place. Take GDPR. In fact, we're taking some of the core tenets of GDPR and making that true for all consumers and customers all over the world with our services. So that's the approach we're going to take going forward.
You've made some big buys, Satya, including LinkedIn. I was recently speaking with your chairman, John Thompson, who said he's supportive of more big buys if they are as successful as LinkedIn. Should we be looking for you to make more big acquisitions like this? I mean, Netflix, there's perennial speculation about Microsoft's interest there, given that it's the only big tech giant without a huge foothold in the streaming space.
I mean, see, first, for us, obviously, the real focus is on our organic growth and organic investments. We are big spenders in R&D, and that sort of is at the core. But we are always going to look for secular growth markets, whether it's Minecraft or LinkedIn or now GitHub. We look for things where we can grow, and the TAM going forward is going to be expansive. We need to be able to contribute something unique, and that's something that's very important to me. I don't want to get into businesses where Microsoft can't contribute and execute super well on behalf of those customers, and we need to be able to operate them. With LinkedIn and Minecraft, we did a fantastic job of really staying true to what the ethos of those communities was, and that's the same sensibility we want to bring to GitHub as well, and that's what will define what we do going forward.
My conversation earlier there with Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella. Later in the show, we're going to speak to a GitHub competitor that says developers are fleeing the platform. The CEO of GitLab will be joining us to give his reaction to this deal. Coming up, Facebook fighting back, disputing a report made by the New York Times about how it shares data with phone makers. We will discuss next. This is Bloomberg. Facebook is disputing a report about how it shares data with mobile phone makers. The New York Times says Facebook has struck deals with device manufacturers that allow them full access to information on users and their friends. The social network says those deals were intended to help phone makers create their own version of Facebook. And it says the data mostly stays on the phones that access it. Joining us now in New York, Henning Schlertz-Rinne, professor at Columbia University and former chief technology officer of the U.S. Federal Communications Commission. Also with me here in San Francisco, we have Bloomberg Tech Sarah Friar, who covers all things Facebook. So Sarah, walk us through what happened here and how serious this is.
So this is potentially very serious because, remember, Mark Zuckerberg told Congress that the loophole that allowed third-party developers to share people's friends of friends information has been closed by Facebook in 2014. And this report says that, in fact, there were other kinds of deals, maybe not with app developers, but with device makers that did allow the disclosure of information on people and their friends with a third party.
And they weren't loopholes at all. They were intentional.
And they were intentional. They were part of these contracts that allowed these device makers to make Facebook apps. So that is concerning because of the idea of consent. Now remember, Facebook has this 2011 decree with the Federal Trade Commission whereby if they share any Facebook user data, they need to have informed consent from those users. So is that in violation of this decree? Did Zuckerberg mislead Congress? These are all the questions that are percolating around this new report, and Facebook says that this is not like what happened with Cambridge Analytica whatsoever. It's a very different kind of relationship.
Now, take a listen to how Facebook is pushing back on this today. Ime Archibong, Facebook Vice President of Product Partnership, saying these partners signed agreements that prevented people's Facebook information from being used for any other purpose than to recreate Facebook-like experiences. We are not aware of any people's information being misused by these companies. Professor, what do you make of that reaction, that response from Facebook?
So I think there are two sides to that particular story, namely the risks or what actually happened and the kind of general way of organizing how information is shared. So it may well be that none of the information, unlike in the Cambridge Analytica case, got to the wrong people for a wrong purpose. But by sharing information with 60 plus other entities, some of whom are located in the United States, some are located outside the United States, it becomes very difficult to track exactly what happens, or if something were to go wrong, to fix it after the fact.
It's interesting, Sarah. We saw Facebook Apple make a shot across the bow at Facebook today, saying they're going to do more to prevent companies like Facebook, they didn't say Facebook by name, from being able to access user data without consent. And at the same time, Apple, along with Samsung and other device makers, is one of the companies that got this access. I mean, are the manufacturers at all culpable here?
Well, Apple was certainly one of these companies that you mentioned, and I think that this jab that they're making at Facebook, it's easy for them to say because they don't make money off of advertising, but this allows Apple to just have more control over our data in a different way, and it helps them personalize our experience just like it helps Facebook personalize our experience on Facebook. Data is power for these companies, and whether or not it's used for advertising, it is the thing that makes them valuable in many ways. And so for Apple to say, we care so much about your privacy that we will make it impossible for other companies to track you on our websites, I mean, they're not making it easy for anyone else to play in the sandbox that they control.
Meantime, Facebook shares did decline slightly today, but Professor Shlertrini, Facebook has recovered its losses, that it saw over the weeks following the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Is this really going to degrade public trust in Facebook, or is this something that a few people in a bubble are concerned about?
I think it has a little bit of both. Namely, a few people will be very concerned, but given that so many of us depend on Facebook for both our professional and certainly our personal lives, for organizing meetings, to keeping in touch with family and friends, the hurdle of dropping Facebook is so high, so I doubt that this will have a major repercussion. Plus, many of these platforms are no longer actively being supported, so this is, to some extent, more backward-looking than forward-looking. But it does indicate a pattern of behavior that makes you wonder as to whether this is an issue of culture or just of decisions that look maybe not quite as wise today as they might have looked 5 or 6 years ago.
Exactly. Sarah, are there legal issues here? Does this violate that 2011 consent decree? Will this invite even more scrutiny from, U.S. regulators as well as European regulators?
It's pouring fuel on the fire for those discussions to be had. We saw so many comments from lawmakers, regulators around the world today saying that this means that maybe there could be another chance to bring the companies in for testimony, that there is more to be done here. So the story's not over.
And you will keep us posted on it. Sarah Fryer, who covers Facebook for us. Henning Shlertrini, professor at Columbia University, former CTO of the US FCC. Thank you both. All right, coming up, we return to the Apple Worldwide Developers Conference, and Thrive CEO Arianna Huffington will join us. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Back to our top story. At Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference, it rolled out a new set of tools to monitor screen time and some nice-to-have features like shortcuts, which lets people set up strings of tasks using Siri. It also introduced features to help iPhone users put down their phones, at least temporarily, after criticism that we are addicted to them. Among the people in attendance at Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference, Thrive CEO Arianna Huffington. We caught up with her just a few moments after the keynote wrapped to discuss the tech giant's push to curb tech addiction.
Apple is putting these features that help us block notifications, sync them with our calendar, geolocate them, and also give us a clear visibility into how much time we're spending with different apps, games, etc. And all these new features are being integrated seamlessly into the operating system. So, Emily, you know how hard it is to change behavior, and what is so exciting about these announcements today is that because they are so seamlessly integrated, it's going to be much easier to use them. We know that we all need to set boundaries in our relationship with technology, but we are all having a hard time doing it because we are becoming increasingly addicted. And even in this convention center here, with 5,600 developers from 77 countries. When Craig Federighi announced these changes, there was applause from the developers at the very moment when he talked about being able to set app limits, to decide how much time you spend on apps. And these are people who are making their living from apps. So it shows how far the culture has changed.
Well, the irony is rich, though, because at the same time, Apple is releasing features that make the technology even more addictive, like the Emojis and group FaceTime. I mean, shouldn't we just be turning off our phones? Or is it really on the company, or is it up to us?
It's obviously ultimately it's up to us, but being empowered with tools and with knowledge about how much time we're spending on our phones is key. Because, Emily, a lot of people don't even recognize how much time they are spending on their different social media apps, games, etc. And also, Apple announced very important parental controls. So with one touch, you can limit how much time your child is spending on certain apps. You can put downtime on their phone, so when they go to sleep, they can't access their apps and social media. So going also much deeper in this very important area, because we know how difficult it has been for parents to navigate their children's relationship with technology, and we know the data that there's an increase in mental health problems among teenagers, depression, anxiety. So this is really the moment when we urgently need to respond to what is happening.
At the same time, Apple fired a shot across the bow at Facebook today, announcing new alerts to protect users from freely giving away their data to companies like Facebook. This as the New York Times has a new report out about how Facebook's relationships with device partners goes even deeper than perhaps we thought, and they gave them more data than was perhaps disclosed. How concerning is this to you, that this data controversy only continues?
Well, I think it's just begun, Emily. I think this is going to be a very big issue. We are all coming to terms with just how much data we're giving away and how unprotected it has been. And Apple has been kind of a leader in protecting users' data. And as you've heard today, this is going to continue. They announced more features that make it easier to protect individual data.
Some of my conversation there with Arianna Huffington, Thrive Global CEO from Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference. SpaceX has marked its 11th mission of the year. The company's Falcon 9 rocket carried a satellite for longtime customer SES of Luxembourg early Monday. SpaceX is targeting roughly 30 missions in total this year, up from a record 18 in 2017. The company's valuation has climbed to about $25 billion, with new funding putting it on course to become the third most valuable venture-backed startup in the United States after Uber and Airbnb. Meantime, Tesla's annual shareholder meeting is coming Tuesday, and the company is tackling a slew of issues that are sure to arise, from production delays to questions around driverless technology to the capricious behavior of founder and CEO Elon Musk. Bloomberg Technology digs into another point of contention, Tesla's board, and who's on it.
Tesla's annual shareholders meeting this year is a big one. First off, the mounting pressure to shake up Tesla's board. Activist investor CTW Investment Group came first, opposing the re-election of 3 directors: private equity investor Antonio Gracias, Elon's brother, Kimball Musk, and James Murdoch, CEO of 21st Century Fox. These 3 directors are up for re-election, as Tesla's 9-member board serves staggered terms. Then came Institutional Shareholder Services. The largest proxy advisory firm followed suit, urging investors to vote against Gracias and Murdoch, and went a step further to push a separate proposal to split the role of chairman and chief executive officer. Then there's Steve Jurvetson. He's been on leave from Tesla's board for over 6 months, an unusually long time for the director of a public company to be in limbo. Jurvetson parted ways with his own venture capital firm in November after allegations of misconduct. So, why all the pressure on the board? 2 words: production delays. Tesla has struggled to mass manufacture its Model 3. Delays have strained the company's balance sheet, and the stock has suffered as a result. ISS is also concerned that Antonio Gracias' firm, Valor Capital Management Corp., provided consulting services to Tesla for which it was reimbursed over $34,000, a potential conflict of interest. Tesla's board has long drawn flack for being comprised of some of Musk's closest confidants. In a regulatory filing vouching for the company's directors, Tesla stressed that its mission to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy, quote, requires a board willing to commit to long-term goals. Musk himself has said that producing the Model 3 would take Tesla on a drive through production hell. Still, in Tesla's favor, shares are up over 200% over the last 5 years and just got a boost after a break fix helped Tesla's Model 3 win a coveted recommendation from Consumer Reports.
Coming up, some developers say Microsoft buying GitHub is terrific. Others say it's terrifying and the competition stands to benefit. We're going to hear from one competitor, GitLab, who says new developers are flocking to them. This is Bloomberg. The news that Microsoft is buying GitHub for $7.5 billion has sent shockwaves through the software developer community. GitHub houses code for millions of users, and some developers are concerned about what happens when one of the biggest tech firms in the world buys it. Competitor GitLab is reaching out to users, saying on its homepage, migrate from GitHub to GitLab, with a link showing how to move your projects over. Joining us now, Sid Sijbrandij, CEO of GitLab. So when you first heard this was happening, that Microsoft was buying GitHub, what did you think? Was this an opportunity for you?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's great validation for our space, but it's also an opportunity. Every time there's a big change, there's people that don't agree and move. So that was an opportunity to. We saw on Twitter that people were tweeting, moving to GitLab. By now, over 1,500 tweets, and we thought we had to reach out.
You said you've seen a spike in traffic. Just how many people are going from there to your site? You know, is there any way to quantify this? Because I'm curious how much this is just a threat. You know, a lot of people saying they're angry, but they're not actually walking.
Yeah, no, we're seeing a lot of people. On GitLab.com, we've seen over 50,000 people creating new repositories. But besides that, GitLab is open core, so you can host it yourself. And there's a lot of people downloading GitLab right now and setting up servers.
So I spoke with Satya Nadella earlier today, and he said he promises to put developers first. Do you not believe him, or do you think it's not possible for a company with so many objectives to really put developers first?
I believe him. I think Microsoft has shown that it's the new Microsoft, and they've done great. And the new CEO of GitHub, Nat Friedman, shows he really understands developers. So I believe him when he says they're going to be good maintainers of GitHub.
So then, what's so bad about GitHub?
There's nothing bad about
What's so
GitHub.
much better about GitLab?
It's a fundamentally different product. First of all, it's open core, so a lot of it is open source. You can host it yourself. But second, and I think most importantly, it's not just code hosting. Where GitHub, you host your code, GitLab is the entire DevOps lifecycle. So all the way from planning something to rolling it out, container registries, monitoring, all in a single product. And that allows you to get the whole organization on the same page. And that's why people are flocking to it.
Now, part of the reason GitHub sold is because they tried for years to develop a sustainable business, but they were having trouble driving significant revenue, turning a profit. Is your business going to be any different?
I think we're seeing great adoption. We're closing seven-figure deals now, and for the last 5 years, we doubled incremental ACV. Every year, we're getting a lot more.
ACV?
ACV. Our revenues are close to tripling every year.
So, does this deal at all make you think about whether you can build a sustainable company, or whether you will sell in the future, or will have to sell in the future to a bigger player?
Yeah, so we took external investment, so we have to have a liquidity event at some point. That means either being acquired or an IPO. We're driving towards an IPO in 2020, and that hasn't changed. That's been the case since 2015.
Has anybody made an offer for GitLab? Have you received any interest?
Not in the last week, but throughout our life cycle as a company, we had different offers.
Now, as I understand it, you use Azure as your cloud service. Is that going to continue?
No, we're going to move to Google Compute Platform. That was already in the works, and we'll expedite that a bit.
Okay, and what is the impetus for the move?
We really believe in hybrid cloud, being able to run your applications anywhere. The whole world is moving to Kubernetes as a technology that unlocks that, and GCP is really good at running Kubernetes because Google created it.
So overall, what do you think this deal means for the open source community? Obviously, there are other competitors like Atlassian, Microsoft now buying GitHub. How does this reshape the landscape?
I think it's great for the open source community. I think Net and Microsoft are going to be great maintainers of GitHub, so I don't think anything bad will happen there. But there's more choice. And for example, recently GNOME and Debian moved to GitLab, and we're very excited about that.
All right. Sid Sijbrandij, CEO of GitLab. Thank you so much for stopping by. Coming up, Apple announced its latest software updates at its annual Worldwide Developers Conference in San Jose. We will dig into all the details next. This is Bloomberg. Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference is an event for developers, and most of the new features out will be relevant mostly to them, like the coming unification of iOS and macOS apps. Some of the other takeaways, group FaceTime calls are now possible with up to 32 users, along with new tools to build ever more realistic AR experiences. To talk about what it all means for Apple and its developer base, I'm joined by Bloomberg's Opinion's Shira Ovide in New York, and here with me in San Francisco, we've got our Bloomberg tech editor, Alistair Barr. So, wrapping up the highlights, Alistair, how does this set Apple up for the future?
It shows again what a powerful platform they are. They get to control things that are important to Facebook, right? They're at the front end of the funnel. When we reach for our phone, Apple's basically in control, and other companies have to follow along. That's probably the main takeaway. And then I would say on the privacy front, Apple has been doing a lot of very strong privacy moves for quite a few years now. I would say only this year has it really entered the national consciousness, and that is causing them to push on with some of those things.
Very strong statement from Apple today, announcing new features that will alert users when other companies are trying to access their data. Take a listen to what Craig Federighi, Senior Vice President of Software Engineering, had to say.
We believe that your private data should remain private. Now, not because you've done something wrong or that you have something to hide, but because there can be a lot of sensitive data on your devices, and we think you should be in control of who sees it.
Tim Cook himself has also been personally out front saying that he wouldn't be in this position that Facebook is in. Shira, what do you make of Apple making this strong statement today?
Look, I mean, some of it I think is ego, right? That Apple wants to set itself apart from other tech companies that it thinks are irresponsible. It's debatable. I was really struck, though, by some of the privacy protections that Facebook announced today for Safari, both for iOS and for the Mac, that seemed, clearly targeted at Facebook, basically saying that Safari now, any website that has these kind of like or share tools that are on most websites, including Bloomberg's own, that essentially are data harvesting systems for Facebook, so that Facebook can collect users' web browsing activity, that it's now going to set a pop-up alert on Safari anytime somebody encounters one of those like or share buttons that's sending data back to the home company. Again, that's largely Facebook, and I wonder if that will kind of basically force more people to deny Facebook access to that kind of data harvesting.
And yet, it is a little bit ironic, Alistair, since Apple was one of the device partners that this latest revelation from the New York Times that Facebook shared with all of these phone makers, Apple being one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's why Tim Cook is again being pretty outspoken. He's probably very annoyed by that report and by that development. It doesn't do well with their general the general message they want to send out that they're pro-privacy. Of course, that Facebook partnership program, Facebook says it does that to help the device makers bring the Facebook experience to users, but yeah, it doesn't look good at all.
Right, Facebook has pushed back hard on this report. Shira, you pointed out that Facebook shares have recovered. We talked earlier about whether this is really going to put a real dent in public trust. Investors don't seem to care. What is the real fallout from this going to be?
I think it's going to be hard to know what the real fallout is. So you're right. Investors have decided that they don't believe that Facebook's string of privacy scandals is really hurting business or going to hurt business. But I think you can see that now politicians, regulators, and the public and investors are more attuned to Facebook's responsibility over the user information that it collects and how it conducts itself in the world. And anytime you have these flare-ups, these new reports, there's the possibility that it does affect both Facebook's usage, advertisers' interest in the platform, and the share price. And so I do think they're in a little bit of a penalty box permanently because of these series of data privacy scandals.
Permanent penalty box. All right, I do want to talk a little bit about Apple TV, obviously some enhancements to the platform and a new announcement about distribution. Take a listen.
Up to 50 million homes will be able to choose Apple TV to access all their live channels and thousands of on-demand programs. And they'll be able to use Siri and the TV app to get access to their TV service, not only on Apple TV, but on iPhone and iPad as well.
Apple's Jen Folds there talking about this new deal, Alistair, with Charter Spectrum. Explain the significance of this.
Well, it seems to me that Apple a few years ago was rumored to come out with its own television, physical television, and there were some rumors about very grand plans to change how television works, and I think even some of the executives spoke about it. Announcements like these just show that basically Apple has had to get in line and work with the existing TV players out there. Charter is a very traditional cable company, so it basically shows that Apple has a lot of work if it's going to really change TV.
This as YouTube television is making a big advertising push. Shira, they've sponsored the NBA Finals, and we're seeing YouTube television ads over and over again throughout these basketball games. Beyond Apple TV, there were also enhancements to Apple Watch, but really, nothing major today. No one more things. Is that noteworthy? That there wasn't that sort of noteworthy ending that we usually see at the end of an Apple event?
It felt to me like Apple was sort of made a decision that rather than focus on how many wow features can we cram into a keynote, that it was really doubling down on kind of stability, security, lack of bugs, basically making its existing software and features more reliable, which maybe addresses some of the questions that people have asked in the past couple of years about software bugs, about the futility of Siri and some of the other Apple software products. And it really felt like Apple was trying to address some of those critical questions about whether it had lost its way a little bit in creating software that just works, to use Apple's terms.
So let's talk about, Alistair, the hardware. And, Mark Gurman has reported extensively on what we are looking ahead to in the fall. What's next? Where will this software be running?
Yeah, when you look at the announcements today, the best way to think about it is that this is the software foundation for new hardware products that are kind of going to come out not only later this year, but more importantly in 2 or 3 years. So all the AR stuff that they announced today will work on iPhones and iPads, but actually that's probably laying the foundation for the AR glasses that Mark Gurman has been reporting on for quite a while. Those are coming in maybe 2 or 3 years.
All right. Alistair Barr, Bloomberg Tech, as well as Shira Ovide, Bloomberg Opinions. Thank you both. Well, Google says it'll not renew a contract with the Defense Department that uses artificial intelligence to analyze drone footage. The decision, announced in an email seen by Bloomberg News, caps a debate within the company over whether to use AI to help the military. The decision could limit Google's chances of winning future contracts from the Pentagon. It is currently lobbying for 2 DoD contracts worth $18 billion. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. On tomorrow's show, we will be speaking with Mandy Ginsberg, CEO of Match Group. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.